everybody. It's Susan and Susan here today to talk more education matters. How are you doing today, Susan?
Hi, I'm good. It's been a little like tech crazy here, but hopefully everything is working smoothly and no more power glitches. So,
Fingers crossed.
that's just how people's lives start the day, it seems like.
Well, I was thinking we would start our day a little different today.
Okay.
So I was, I had a few phone calls already this morning from parents, and somebody sent me somewhere, and I was looking on one of the Facebook pages that we manage, and I saw this post, and I thought, these new parents that new to the system parents, we get often questions over and over and over that when you read some of these Facebook posts, the responses to the questions that they're getting from other people aren't always helpful to them. So, what do you think if I recap a question I saw today and see if you could add some words of wisdom that would help parents? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, let's give it a whirl. We'll see. I'll give them some answer.
Perfect. Perfect. So, the one I saw today was a mom who has a son with autism. And she said, I've been trying for years to work with the school district to get an IEP with him. And she said they have done evaluations that indicate he needs specially designed instruction. And the school district just keeps saying he doesn't qualify because he's got good grades. Last year, he failed. He failed math and he failed, I don't know, something else. And so the school district still doesn't want to give him an IEP because, of course, what do you think the school district says? Little Johnny wasn't trying. So
Oh no.
he wasn't trying. So that's why he doesn't need an IEP. And then I saw these answers and recommendations people were telling her that are riddled with misinformation. And I thought, Susan, all day long, you could answer this question easily. So I'm tossing it to you.
Okay. So, a couple of things that I hear. One, I have a question, and maybe I don't know whether or not you know the answer, having read the scenario. Were the evaluations done by the school district or were they completed by a private evaluator?
The parent had
Private
evaluation
evaluations.
because the
So the
school
parent asked, I'm sorry.
school refused to do evaluation, said he was fine.
Okay. So I just wanted to clarify that for people who might be listening. So this parent knew her child was struggling and she asked the school for help and they refused. And so she went to a private evaluator, probably paid.
Mhm.
That's not a cheap date to go get a private evaluation. Um, and came back and brought that information to the school and said, I've been concerned. So I went and I investigated a little bit, and here's the results of what we found. And I want you to take a look at this and consider
Mhm.
it. And do you know whether they did? Did the school even look at it or meet with her?
She said that they held a meeting and they explained to her that he was fine and he didn't qualify. But she didn't give details about like the notices or any of that stuff. But
Right. So there's a lot of, as if that is your scenario, if you're listening and you're like, oh my gosh, that sounds like what we're going through. Know that there's a lot of procedural requirements that the school district has to give you notice. They have to give you written notice after the meeting if they refuse to accept your results or they refuse to implement things you've asked for. So if you have already, done what this parent has done and you're at that point in the process, you should have something written from the district refusing your request. What I would suggest for this family is at this point, they need to send a letter requesting the district do formal evaluations, saying that they believe that their child is a child with a disability, that they need specially designed instruction, special education services. In order to progress, they should outline what their concerns are. I would reattach the evaluation, even though it's already been submitted. I would make sure that it's part of the record that I'm creating. And let me just stop. I should start with always, if it isn't in writing, it didn't happen. So this can be an email, it can be a written letter, you could send it certified if you want, but An email record is sufficient to prove that you have taken the action. And I would say to the school, I'd like to meet with you. I'd like to sign consent for evaluations. I believe my child is struggling, that they qualify as a child with a disability. And this isn't the exact language of the letter that I'm giving you. I'm just the process. You
Well,
need to.
and the language is important. What you're saying is important to say specifically.
I'm just saying I wasn't like reciting a letter for you guys to start typing.
Right.
I'm just saying what you need to tell them as you suspect that your child is a child with a disability. Here's why, that needs special education. Here's why they need it. Here's the proof that you have, and that you would like a meeting as soon as possible in order to sign consent to have the school district conduct evaluations.
And and then that triggers a timeline. Can you talk for just a minute about the timeline it triggers?
So an initial evaluation, first time. So if your child already has an IEP, I am not talking to you. An initial evaluation to be considered for services has a 60-day timeline. So once you sign consent, so the day you send the email, the timeline doesn't start. It's when you have a meeting with the school, you sign consent, and that starts that clock. Now, there has been arguments in the past that if you sent a letter saying, I give you consent, that might be the trigger. I don't know that I'd want to fight that battle. And what I think one of the other tips we would give parents is you really have to decide, if you're going down the special education rabbit hole and you accessing that system, what battles are worth fighting and what things just take a lot of energy and don't get us a lot in the end. So what I would say is really try to get in there, get signing consent and requesting that evaluation and get the process started. All of that is conditioned upon, I haven't read what the school said to you about why your evaluation didn't get you an IEP. So there could be additional elements of the story that would change the answer we're giving. This is a very generic answer to, if you are struggling to get your child services and you believe they need them, putting everything you know in writing and asking for a remedy, asking for help from the school district is the first step. If you've already done all that and you're still being rejected and your child is struggling, then you may have to ask for help from an advocate or an attorney and file some sort of grievance process if the school district is not willing to work with you. And we don't have time today to get into what all of that means. But there are other avenues that parents have if you run into roadblocks. But the first step is getting everything in writing, making the request, hopefully signing consent. And if they refuse to do that, then getting a written refusal so that you know where to go from there.
Well, and in this case, having academic failure for the first time ever, they should have taken some action to figure out what's going on, and maybe talk for a minute, if you would, about MTSS or RTI and what should have happened in that process, especially for someone who is begging the school for help.
So in Florida, we are a state that requires a multi-tiered system of support, MTSS. And all students are in what we call tier 1. There's 3 tiers. Tier 1 instruction is what happens in a general ed classroom, and it's the teacher making sure that all of the students are receiving the instruction they need to meet the standards for that grade level. If your child has received tier 1 instruction and they're still struggling, the next step would be tier 2. And tier 2 is a more targeted intervention to maybe pull a small group, do something a little bit different to see if your child can master the content that is being delivered that they didn't get in tier 1, that they didn't understand. Tier 2 could happen for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, couple of months. As a parent, you should be made aware that your child is receiving tier 2 interventions. You should know what they are. You should know what kind of progress your child is making. That notification is expected to go to parents. To be frank, we hear often that parents had no idea that their child was in tier 2. If your child is not responding to tier, so say that, let me start back. If they respond to tier 2 and whatever they were struggling with, they get it, and they can go back to tier 1 level and move on, and they're fine, and kind of end of the story right there. But if your child continues to struggle and tier 2 has not been effective, then we move to tier 3. And tier 3 should be an extremely targeted 1 or 2 children, directly to that child, something different. It should not be the same thing they got in tier 1 and then again in tier 2. And we're going to do some more of what hasn't worked.
That's right.
So,
And we hear
just,
all the time. By the time parents get to us, that's the answer. Well, it was more intensive. We did more of it.
right. So doing more of what hasn't worked, I'm going to venture a guess that it isn't going to work. But I guess some kids need more repetitions, but mainly what we see is doing more of the same thing doesn't get you a different result. So if your child gets tier 3 interventions that are delivered with fidelity, they're individualized to your child, you should be aware of what the interventions are, what are they collecting to monitor your child's progress, and how did they do. If they do really well, again, sometimes it's just getting that information to click for a child. If they do really well and they can return to tier 1, then maybe it's the end of the story. But a lot of times what we see is the tier 3 works, the child goes back to tier 1, and then the whole cycle starts over again. So if you see a pattern of your child continuously is needing to move to tier 3 instruction, that's a really clear indicator that we need more information to understand why can't this child make progress with their general ed peers. Why are they continuously needing something different or more individualized? And if you notice that that's a pattern, over the course of a few months, then I, as a parent, would be going, okay, I want evaluations done. I want to understand, why is my child a struggling learner?
And when you say that, you mean send the email to say, I'm concerned, I would like complete evaluations done in all areas of concern.
I do.
And that's when the meeting should be convened within a reasonable time.
Right. And I guess the last thing that I want to say on this is, even though the process in Florida for eligibility for special education includes having the MTSS process in place, if a parent requests an evaluation, they cannot refuse to grant your request because MTSS is ongoing or has never been started. It is not an excuse not to conduct an evaluation. The school district has a child find responsibility to identify students with disabilities. They need to honor a parent's request for an evaluation, or they need to file a court case against you refusing it, which is really not very common. So don't get scared, but I just want you to know, if they feel very strongly that they have evidence to say this is a child that doesn't need anything, then they have a mechanism to refuse to do it. But most often what we see is that team comes to the table and they at least conduct evaluations and gather information so that they can make an informed decision, the group, and you're part of the group, of what this child needs moving forward.
But what we also very often see, is the school district delaying and denying the evaluation request and blaming it on, we have to do MTSS. Let's wait and see. Let's not rush into anything. Let's just give it some time. And of course, parents believe what they're told and want to work collaboratively with the schools. But the problem is when that happens year after year, because oftentimes what we see when a parent asks for help from schools is the child's grades go up and everything's fine. Don't worry, little Johnny is doing so much better and he's caught up, and it's not always accurate. So
Grades can be subjective.
yeah.
And how much help is that child getting? And and you know what? Good teachers help kids. So
Hmm.
sometimes it's legitimate that the teacher knows this child is struggling, so they give them additional assistance, but it doesn't get documented.
Right.
And that good intention starts to mask things that when the child moves to a different teacher, different grade, all of a sudden those problems that we saw have surfaced again because that additional support is missing. And so again, I applaud good teaching and good intentions, but we need to be really cognizant of not masking a problem that needs to be identified.
Right. Or documenting what you're doing so it can continue
Right.
if it's effective.
So, I hope this tip helps you today. Again, if you are struggling to get your child evaluated, put everything in writing. And if you still run into roadblocks, then look for additional assistance because there are mechanisms that you can follow to up the ante. But and if we have a lot of questions about that, we could do a specific podcast about it. But that's your tip for the day: is put
I
it in
like it.
writing.
It's true. Put it in writing and know what to ask for and know what to look for. I think that's important. So let us know if this is helpful. And if it's helpful, maybe we can start off with tips if it's helpful to parents.
And I wish that it was easy to give a short answer, but there are no short answers in special education. There just
Yes.
aren't,
Yes.
because the processes are convoluted and each child's situation is unique. So we try to give some general tips and tricks, but know that applying that in your individual situation, you really need to look at all the factors.
I agree. Well, thank you for that, Susan.
You're welcome. So last time we were together, we talked about that the state of Florida has a strategic plan for special education. And kind of what drives that is that they have to report to the federal government on indicators about, is special education in Florida working? And if it is, Yahoo. And if it isn't, then what are we going to do to get better? And so every year the state puts out what I call a report card for the state at the state level in each county, because in Florida our school districts are county level school districts. They get a report card on these indicators. So we thought today quickly we would just go through and see how's the state doing, and then look, since again we're in Sarasota County, we thought we'd look at our county's report card. And I have a few years of those, but after I looked through the data, I thought, let's focus today on the most current report card for the state and the most current report card for the district. And it is reporting on school year 21-22. And the reason that I thought we'd limit it to that is the year prior to that was the year everybody was out for COVID. And so the data is just a little bit wonky. The way it's reported, some categories aren't reported, and we just know that the COVID years for kids and for school districts were just unusual. The data isn't as consistent as it was in prior years. It was an anomaly. So let me see if I can get technology to work and get us hooked up to the reports. Yay.
Beautiful.
And I'm going to give it the whole screen so it might be easier for people to see. And so the first report that I have on the screen currently And you're going to see me move a minute so I can see my bigger screen because vision is not what it used to be.
No, we
This,
don't do it all.
okay, so this is the report card. I want to start with the state. So the annual performance report that was issued in May of 2024, so it's pretty current. But for the state of Florida, and again, you can see for the first two indicators, we're looking at the school year 21-22. That's where this data comes from. And they do all kinds of surveys, they call them, but it's really data collection that the schools in the state put into a form that they call a survey. And the first indicator, they're looking at the percentage of students ages 14 to 21 that are graduating with a regular diploma. And so the state sets a target. They want greater than or equal to 86.75% of students to be graduates. And they met their target. 87.51% of students in the state of Florida graduated with a regular diploma. And then,
So, quick question.
mhm,
The other piece of that would be graduating with not a standard diploma, correct? But
well, it would be students who either exit and don't graduate. It would be students which are going to be captured here in this dropout rate, the next
right,
indicator down,
yeah,
or it's going to be students who get a certificate of completion. So they went through school, they did all their courses, and they did not meet one of the requirements to get a standard diploma. Often it's actually not ESE kids. Often it's students who might be struggling students that went through school that didn't have IEPs
right.
and they couldn't pass standardized testing. And so they did not exit with a diploma. And then so we might have some special ed students who don't meet all of the standards that are in place. So again, they exit with a certificate of completion, but they did not exit with an actual diploma.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yep. And so while we're talking about this dropout rate, the state's target was greater than or equal to 11.9%. So they want to be under that. And they hit their target at 11.86%. So the less dropouts you have, the better off we are. So before we go further, I'm going to look at our local data for last year. And so you see again, school year 21-22. And the target data was 86.75 in Sarasota, the same as it was for the state, but they did not meet their target. They had less graduates than what the state target was, and they did not meet that target. Again, it's the same measure for dropouts. The state's target is 11.9. Sarasota's target is that. And we had many more dropouts than the state average. And that to me is concerning.
I agree
That
with
we
you.
have kids dropping out of school. And, if I was a board member, I would want to understand, why do we have kids dropping out? What can we do to prevent it? That I would want to deep dive into, what does that number represent? Who are
Yeah,
these children that
it's a
aren't
big
being successful?
that's a
Say
big
that
number.
again.
It's a big number.
It is a big number.
Mhm.
That's a lot. That if you're in a district that's roughly, 40,000 kids, plus or minus, depending on the enrollment, think about almost, 14% of those children exiting without a diploma, dropping out of school. That's worrisome.
And we're an A-rated district, right?
Absolutely. I that
Yep.
might be a different podcast, but yes, we are an A-rated district. So I'm going to go to question 3, indicator 3, and look at the state's numbers. And so this is looking at assessment. And we talked about this on Tuesday, that there was broken down in 4 places: participation rate for students with IEPs, the proficiency rate for those students, proficiency rate for students that are on a modified curriculum, and then is there a gap in the proficiency rates for students with IEPs compared to all students. When we look at the state, they have a target for participation of 95% or greater at every, so they look at 4th grade, 8th grade, and high school for language arts, and they look in the same time periods for math. And how many students participated statewide? We met our mark in 4th grade and 8th grade, but we did not in high school. We did not have 95% or greater of our students participating in the high school testing. When we look at Sarasota, we see the same thing for participation, that we met our marks for participation in 4th grade and 8th grade, but in high school, we only have, just over 94% of our students participating in the testing. And so then when we look at proficiency rates, and I'm sorry, I'm going to keep jumping back and forth, at the state level, the student, and I think I want people to really pay attention to what is the benchmark we have for proficiency.
That's right.
We're only expecting in 4th grade reading for students with IEPs that 24% of students are going to be proficient.
That's
and they
shocking.
met the mark. Hey, let's celebrate. 25.62% of our students in 4th grade reading met the proficiency mark at the state level.
So 75% of our students are not proficient already by 4th grade.
Correct. So then when we get to 8th grade, we only expect 20%, and we didn't meet the mark. We were only at 18.47. So that's greater than 80% of our students are not proficient readers by 8th grade statewide. And it doesn't get better for high school. Our mark is 18% we're trying to get to, and we're just under that at 17.71. Math, our percentages we're trying to get to are a little bit higher in math. 29% proficiency target for 4th grade. We hit that. We exceeded it by 33.69%. But still, to your point, 65% of our kids are not proficient in math. By 8th grade, we dropped the target to 24%, but we hold kind of. We're still at 33.66%. So we meet our target. I think we'll agree the target's low, but at least it doesn't look like we were losing kids along the way by 8th grade. And then for high school, our target drops to 16%. Our amount of kids that are showing proficiency drops below the target at 15.46%, and we did not meet our measure.
So what doesn't make sense to me is these numbers, when you look at these numbers of kids that are not proficient, how are they then all of a sudden it's a miracle graduating with a standard diploma meeting state standards?
Well, because if they're a student with an IEP and the IEP team convenes and says that the state assessments are not appropriate to measure that student's ability, the team can agree to do a waiver of the assessment results, and therefore the student can graduate.
So we look at those graduation numbers, assume students are meeting proficiency, but when you dig a little deeper, it's not possible.
And as a person who sat in a lot of IEP meetings in high school with a lot of students, many of whom take other assessments, they might take the ACT or the SAT, which measures things in a different way. And it may mean that they get a concordance score. And so even though they didn't meet the proficiency rate on what the state is measuring, they may have shown that they were capable of doing things on a different test
Right.
rather than a waiver. And that's how they got to graduation. So there's some different pathways to graduation beyond just the state test. It would be interesting maybe in a future podcast to look at what are the waiver numbers for
Right.
ESE students for graduation. But on the statewide test that the state of Florida has adopted to measure proficiency of the standards that they're measuring in that grade level, our high school math kids are not meeting the mark. Something is awry. So in middle school and 8th grade, they were, holding their own compared to elementary school. But by high school, what we're expecting of students, what we're measuring, we fell off the cliff.
Right. Time to take a look at the curriculum, maybe.
Or the test.
Board members, any board members listening?
So when we look at Sarasota, for 4th grade and 8th grade, I'm sorry, let me get to the right place. ELA reading for 4th grade, our target is the same as the state. It's at 24%. And we had 30% of our students meet the mark. The state had 25%. So we're doing a little bit better than the state in reading in 4th grade. But by 8th grade, our mark is 20%, but the amount of students who are showing us proficient have dropped to 18.9%. And so at the state level, it's kind of in line with where the state sees things. It's at 18.47, and we're at 18.09. So look, we have this 25% overage for 4th grade beyond where the state's mark is. But by 8th grade, we've dropped below what the rest of the state is doing. And then by high school, we're meeting our target. We're over 18%, but it's kind of in line from 8th grade to high school, but we dropped where our proficiency mark is.
Right.
And so if we look at the state for high school, they're at 17.71%, and Sarasota's at 18.09%. We're kind of in line with where the rest of the state is.
These numbers are shocking, a little bit shocking. Wouldn't you agree?
Less than 80% of students by high school level are showing proficiency in reading.
Right. So we've been saying this for years. We've been talking about our reading crisis here. And I think that's a topic I'm going to write down, Susan, that we need to talk about, because I wonder, what are we accessing? Because we've got a very generous community here. I know there's a huge grant talking about money available for children's reading, and it will be interesting to see what the district has done to partner with any of those people to help them fix this problem.
And beyond partnering even with other folks and trying to get help, just what are we doing in our classrooms? What curriculum are we using? What training are our teachers receiving? Because the gap for our ESE students, and I know we're going to get to the gap in a minute, but as you all can see, everything highlighted in yellow means we haven't met the mark. Something's wrong.
Yep.
We should not have so many special education students who are not proficient readers.
Well, and so this came out recently for the 21 school year data, but our district they're good at data.
Well, and just so you know, I should have clarified this. When you look at under assessment under 3, we're another school year. So for graduation and dropout rate, we're a year behind, but the assessment data is actually from 22-23. It's a different school year. I should have pointed that out to people, but when you look at this report card, see where graduation rate and dropout is for the 21-22 school year.
Right.
When we look at assessment data, it's more current. It's for the 22-23 school year.
Right. And that data, I'm gonna kudos to our district because they're very good at data and they can drill down to the student. What they're bad at is transparency and sharing that information. So they knew this. They've been aware of this. It's not like it's new news, I guess is what I wanted to say.
Right, but parents who are, I mean, I don't know how many parents actually have ever looked at these report cards for this from the state. And if you go to the Florida Department of Education website, fldoe.org, and you poke around, you can find all kinds of information out on the state's website that's data related like this. So every county's report cards are out there, the state's report cards are out there. I'm going to finish going through assessment, and then we'll just quickly go through the rest of them. I don't want to spend, 16 hours today with you, although I like you. But I mean, data's a little dry and there's a lot of it here. But to me, what is important is to look at these numbers in their totality that are what we're expecting students to do is we're expecting less than 20, more than, let me flip that. We're expecting that more than 75% of our students will not be proficient readers because they are in special education.
It's a very low bar,
It's a
extremely low
really
bar.
low bar.
Yeah,
And when we get to, so 3C, let me just address that for a minute. The proficiency rate for students on alternate assessment. It is a completely different instrument that the state has that's designed for students on a modified curriculum. You can see the target marks for that instrument are higher, but we're still not meeting them mostly. Even, you know what I mean? And that is something that is designed to take into account the severity of the student's disability that is being measured. There are different levels in how the test is given to students, but even with those modifications and that adapted assessment, we are not meeting the mark for those students. And so the last thing I want to say is when we look at 3D, which is the gap in the proficiency rate, this again is comparing students with IEPs to all students. And what I think is important, beyond the fact that we haven't met, if you look at our numbers, they're abysmal. We did not meet our mark in any of those areas of closing the gap. So again, to my point that what we're doing isn't working.
that's right.
If what we were doing was working, then our gap should be diminishing.
That's right.
And so let me look at the state's numbers. The statewide, you can see they are making some progress. I mean, it's not great, but at least their target marks for reading, they met for all grade levels. And for math, they met for eighth graders. Let me just make sure that the benchmarks so the targets are the same in our county as they are at the state level. So Sarasota is missing the boat somewhere for our ESE kids, and the state's report card reflects that.
And we have been saying that for a number of years.
We have.
Mhm.
And so I'm not going to keep flipping back and forth between the state and Sarasota, but just know suspension and expulsions, our kids with IEPs, we had a target. So this 3.0 is a risk ratio. So we want to make sure that we are not don't have a significant discrepancy in the amount of kids with IEPs who are being suspended and expelled compared to their general education peers. We don't want that ratio to be more than 3. And it isn't overall in totality for kids with IEPs, 2.83. We're meeting that mark. What's particularly worrisome now is when you look at 4B, and BL7 stands for our Black students, that risk ratio number is 12.88. It should be less than 3. So we have a significant problem of over suspending and expelling Black students in Sarasota.
Are we under monitoring for that? We were at one time, right?
We used to be. I don't know right now whether we are still under monitoring. Um,
Yeah, if not, why not?
right, right, exactly. And let's see if that's a statewide problem. So you can see, and for the state, we have a problem. Um, that's interesting. It says that it's 1.01, which is less than 3, but so they did meet the mark there, and they also met the mark for in subgroups. So, I mean, you look at this statewide, Black students are more likely 1.72 risk ratio, and Sarasota's at 12.88. What's going on?
Right?
It's a problem.
Yeah.
And if it was my child, I would want some answers.
Well, absolutely.
So, quickly going through the rest of this, educational environments, that's looking, are students in the least restrictive environment? Are we giving them access to their non-disabled peers at a rate that meets our targets? For students with IEPs, kindergarten through 21, the answer is yes in Sarasota. So this first number says the amount of students that are in with gen ed peers 80% or more of the day. Our target 77. We have almost 85% of our kids. The second target is having children that are with their non-disabled peers in the regular class less than 40% of the day. We want a target that is less than or equal to 13%. We're at 10. So we're meeting our mark there. And then the percentage of students who were enrolled kindergarten through 21 in a separate school, we want that number under 3%, and it's at 3.39. So for people who don't know Sarasota that are watching, we have a center school in Sarasota called Oak Park School. It's only for students with the most significant disabilities that are served there that can't appropriately be served in their regular, with their regular peers. And again, that number, we're just over. The state says you should be less than 3%, and we're at 3.39. So preschool environments, again, this is students should be in regular early childhood programs. Our target is that 26% of our students served in regular early childhood programs. We're only at 18. So we have a significant way to go for improvement there. Percentage of students with IEPs who are enrolled in a preschool attending a separate special education. Here you want to be less than 60%. We're at 74. So it's kind of the inverse of the above question. Again, here in Sarasota County, we have a lot of public school-based ESE pre-K classrooms. Those classrooms are only serving kids with IEPs. So that is why this number is significant, is significantly over where the target number is. And then the amount of students who are receiving services in the home, because these are little kids, they're not mandatory to be in schools yet. Our target is less than 0.38. We met it because nobody's being served there. Or if they are, we're not counting them.
Ooh.
Okay, so then we look at preschool outcomes. So we know where they're being served, how are they doing? And we're meeting our mark except for the percentage of preschool students who have positive social emotional skills by the time they're 6. And we should be greater than 69.9, and we're only at 60. And we've heard this, that we have a lot of little kids coming who have some social skill deficits or have emotional regulation difficulties. Um, there's a lot of speculation about why that's true, and I am not informed enough to really speculate, but some of the things that we've heard are it's related to the COVID isolation, or it's related to substance abuse and the impact that that's had on families in the community. So and I'm sure there's other things, but those are two of the things that I have just heard in passing, but don't know enough to speak beyond that. Our other preschool indicators, we're hitting targets. Use of knowledge and skills, functioning within age expectations, use appropriate behaviors to meet their needs. And then we get to the percentage of students who are functioning within age expectations and use of appropriate behaviors. And again, that's where we see that we didn't meet the mark. So we're really struggling a little bit with the behavioral needs of our little people. Here's the number that's not shocking to me. It's a topic that's near and dear to Sue and I. We have been involved in parent involvement at a policy level and at a practical level for long time in our local school district. We were both volunteer coordinators. I worked at the district level with the parent involvement folks at the policy level. And it is so disappointing to see that the parent survey, the target is 82.7 and 82% of parents who report that the schools facilitated parent involvement, whatever that means, and we are not meeting our mark. And Sue, talk just about the perception we hear in the community about parent involvement.
So, couple things I will say about that. So we used to be a very involved.
We can't hear you.
Oh, why not?
Now you're closer. Now I can.
We have been involved, as Susan said, in this for many years. And Sarasota County used to have a very involved, engaged community. Parents were welcomed, even though there were times, even back then, we felt like it wasn't a two-way conversation. You'll hear us say that often. Often when they invited you in, you were being talked at. It wasn't a two-way conversation where we didn't always feel our input was valued, but they at least allowed our input for the most part. And I'll tell you what has happened since COVID. The culture in our school district has just done a 360, and they've done this masterfully, in my opinion.
You mean a 180, right?
Yeah, the opposite. 360 is not all the way around.
Yeah, that would be a circle. We'd be back to where we started from.
Oh yeah, we're not there. We're 180. So the COVID.
She didn't take math in Florida either.
We are no longer a parent-friendly community. We are. When COVID happened, and rightfully so, the schools were locked down, but they took that opportunity to talk all about parent involvement and parent rights. And, we were the epicenter of the parent movement. However, the policies that they were making in the background were anything but parent friendly, and parents are not welcomed in our schools anymore. So this survey that's given out asks a very broad question, like, do you feel you were asked to come to an IEP meeting or something like that? It asks. And then, the answers are yes, very, very, it goes from very positive to very dissatisfied. There's 5 answers on this parent survey. But parents, when they get the survey, think, well, yeah, I was asked to go to an IEP meeting, or yeah, I was asked to, do whatever the question's asking. Now, was it genuine? Was it authentic? Were you really welcomed in the meeting? Were you heard? I think the numbers would be even more significantly disparate if the questions were posed differently on the survey. But that is near and dear to our heart, because it should be a great relationship between the parents and the teachers, and everybody's working in the best interest of the child. And the culture that we have formed here over the last few years is absolutely not that. It is a I think, Susan, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think we've got some great teachers. I think we've got some amazing parents, but the leadership at the district has intentionally worked to pit them against each other, in my opinion.
I
What?
think that's true, and we're not going to have time to get into the ESE report that was commissioned in Sarasota, but I think it will tease out that there's a trust problem with parents and the district. I mean,
Oh,
that the report, the survey results that they did here locally beyond the state survey supported that there are some communication and trust issues with the parent population and the school district.
well,
And
and I
again,
think
go ahead.
well, I think when we do it also at a future podcast, when we show the numbers of kids exiting our district, they've moved here for the A-rated schools, and after they get a taste of them, they exit the schools. So we're seeing an
And
awful
I
lot
mean,
of
as we look at these numbers, again, when you see something as an A, you believe that it works. That is the A is proficiency. The A represents the top of the heap. And so, but when you look at this report card, especially for, I mean, this is specifically for special ed kids, um, it's concerning to see what we're doing academically and and how few of our children who are actually proficient.
right. And the argument is always, oh, those kids are the struggling learners. Yeah, but some of those kids are brilliant struggling learners. They just need to be taught differently to show what they know and the skills they've mastered. And those are, I think, those are horrific failures we've got happening here in this district. When we know how to teach reading differently and we choose not to do that, I I have no words that it's continuing.
Well, and our biggest category of kids with disabilities, in case we have people who don't know this, are kids with specific learning disabilities. And in order to have a specific learning disability, you actually have to have an average IQ.
Hmm.
So these are not students who are not capable of learning. These are students who have, the way that they take in information or maybe the way they give back information is different. That's why it's real. We have always this debate, should we call it a learning difference instead of a disability?
Right.
Um, so these are children who are very capable, and we have the science. We've had the science for decades to know how to instruct these students appropriately so that they can learn and they can demonstrate what they know. It's making sure that's what we're doing, and these numbers would tell us that we are not there.
Yeah, this is shocking.
Um, So let's just run through the end of this real quickly. Disproportionate representation of racial and ethnic groups, we're meeting our targets. Disproportionate representation in specific disabilities, we're meeting our targets. Child find, you've heard us talk about child find a little bit, and making sure that we're identifying students with disabilities, and there is a deadline that if you suspect a child, you have like a 60-day timeline, and 100%, the state expects, the feds expect that we're going to hit that mark 100% of the time, and we're close, but we're not at 100%. We're at 99.85, so we did not meet that measure.
So let's clarify here. These are the kids that the meeting was convened and they signed consent, and then we went through to get the evaluation. That does not take into account the number of students that parents say, district, please help me. And the district basically doesn't convene that meeting and get the consents for whatever reason. So,
back to where we started this morning.
yes,
That would be a 360.
thank you.
Um, and so early childhood transition, making that transition from little kids that have like early steps in coming into the school, making sure that transition happens, is we are meeting our mark there. Secondary transition, which is preparing students to exit school and not fall off the cliff, we are meeting our mark there. Post-school outcomes, this is looking at students with IEPs once they leave the school district, the percentage of students who are no longer in secondary school. They had IEPs when they left school, and they're now enrolled in higher education within 1 year of learning, 1 year of leaving. We have a target of 27% of kids, and we have 31% that are going on to post-secondary. These are the students, 14B is showing who left school and then they're enrolled in higher ed or are competitively employed in 1 year. We're at 72% of our students with IEPs in that. And then the last indicator we're looking at is post-secondary ed or a training program or competitively employed or in some other employment within 1 year. And we're hitting that mark at 77.39%. So basically, we're saying we don't want our kids with disabilities leaving high school and sitting at home doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not sitting at home doing nothing, then we're meeting our target. And I think if we talk to families how meaningful is what those students doing, we hear a continuum of answers there. What else do we have? And that's really it. I know there were a couple more indicators. There were 16, I think, in the states. I have to go back and look and see which ones aren't reflected here. But you get a sense of we have some work to do.
Yep. I agree. We have some work to do. And what's going to become important is the community uniting to hold board members accountable to their campaign promises, to solve some of these problems that parents have frankly been begging for many years here locally. Would you agree?
I would agree. Absolutely.
Well, I'm excited to look into that ESE report because it still shocks me when I listen to people up on the dais talk about how transparent they want to be and how they really are there for the children and fiscally responsible, and trying to connect all those dots has been pretty difficult for us. Wouldn't you say, Susan?
I would. Getting public records timely is a continuous challenge. Getting public records for some things at all in the format that is useful is a challenge. And, that's one of the things we really encourage our listeners. If there's information that you want to know about your school district, it's out there. Somebody has those records, whether it's at your school district level or at your state Department of Education level or at the federal level. There's a heck of a lot of data about schools and performance and students that is collected.
Mm-hmm.
Are we using that to guide what we're doing and where we're spending our money? Not always. And are we sharing it with the stakeholders who could help influence where we spend our money and the policies we implement? We're not always giving people facts either. A lot of times it's a crafted narrative.
And what we said in the very beginning, it's what they would like people to believe is what is stated, and then the facts that they use are pieces of the picture, not the whole picture. And what's happening here locally, they're getting ramped up to promote the next referendum, which in Sarasota is that 1 mil referendum that's going to be voted on in the general election in November. It continues regardless for the next 2 years.
Some people might not know what that means, Sue, a referendum.
So many years ago, we should just do a whole podcast on this at one point. But
give a 30-second, what is a referendum?
A referendum is additional money that the school board is asking the taxpayers to approve 1 mil of your property tax additionally on top of what you pay towards the public schools. In Sarasota for next year, the referendum that was voted on 2 years ago will raise over $100 million in additional money given to the school district. And they say that there's a referendum budget. You would think there'd be a referendum budget, but we can't see the referendum budget to know exactly where that money is going and what it's being used for. So lots of times, we know it's for the additional 30 minutes of teacher time. But teachers are now saying, wow, my property taxes have elevated so much. It's costing me money to get paid for that additional 30 minutes in my increase in my property taxes. So it's going to be interesting to see if they'll be forthcoming with where they're spending the money for this additional money and if there's any association to any outcomes. Because
I would say we have an extremely generous and well-educated tax base here in Sarasota. We have a lot of senior citizens who don't have kids in school because we're a retiree community. But they're a very generous community. They care about our public schools. They want to volunteer in our public schools. They pay attention to issues. And so, we really encourage our community to hold the school district accountable as we're giving them tax dollars for making sure our kids are getting what they need.
Exactly. We should be swimming in money and the money should be drilled down to the classroom level, because that's your job. Your job is to educate these kids.
And certainly our proficiency numbers we just looked at are why we're questioning this. If we were doing a great job, I don't think anybody would have any, qualms about giving them the money they need to serve our children well. But the problem is not all of our children are being served well. And why not? And where are those dollars going? And could we use them differently? If we're going to give them to you, could we use them differently to make sure that all of our kids are actually learning?
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, thank you for joining us today. Here we were with you for another hour, but again, these are deep topics that have a lot of moving parts. But if we can understand them, hopefully we can influence to make things better for our kids.
I agree. Thank you so much for all that information and deciphering all that edu-speak and teaching me the difference between 180 and 360.
And if you don't learn anything else today, hopefully you guys will know that one's a circle and one's halfway.
Talk to you soon.
Take care. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.